Pleased to see you all tonight, and I particularly want to thank those of you who came to our noontime session, which I think was hugely productive and energizing. So I wanted to thank you for your input. It'll be really instrumental to us as we move forward. I think, as most of you know, I'm Kate Bonensing. I'm the director of the School of Art here at DAP. And we have a museum studies certificate, a graduate certificate, and we're looking towards possibly making that an undergraduate certificate as well, and also a master's in museum studies, and possibly reinvigorating our curatorial practices certificate. So Dorit Cypis, is that right? Dorit Cypis has been kind enough to help us along in that process, and also to offer tonight's lecture about her own personal and professional artistic practice, which has been long and active. She was born in Tel Aviv, Israel, and immigrated to Montreal, Canada as a youth, and to the United States as a young adult, and she currently lives in Los Angeles, California. Cypis has taught on identity and social relations across the United States and Europe, and she holds a Master's in Fine Arts from the California Institute of Arts, or CalArts as it's better known, and a Master's of Conflict Resolution, MDR, from Pepperdine University, which is also in the LA area. She has received numerous awards and fellowships, including the Japan Foundation, Bush Fellowship, McKnight Fellowship, Jerome, Ordway, and Durfee Foundations Fellowships, the City of Los Angeles Cultural Arts Fellowship, the Fellows of Contemporary Art, and 3 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts. She's also exhibited internationally, including at the Whitney Museum of American Art, the International Center for Photography, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Walker Arts Center, amongst many others. She's also exhibited in numerous galleries and community spaces around the world. So help me give Dorit Cypis a warm welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you to DAP for inviting me. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Oh, this thing is weird. I feel like Dr. Spock.
It works well, though.
It does. I have a small ear, though. Okay, should be okay. One of the reasons it was hard for Kate to say my last name is because my mother and my father said the name differently. And so I accept any way that you want to say it. I think that was the way my mother gained some power over my father, was to say his name differently. So it could be Cypis, it could be Cypis, it could be Cypis, whatever. Anyway, and actually I say that because it's a good metaphor for the vision of my life, which has been very much about fluidity and trying not to stay fixed in anything, and trying to constantly apply my interests and what I've learned in all kinds of paths as an artist. And I always say I do everything as an artist, even if it looks like cultural work or mediation work or other practices that I do. I do so as an artist. The reason why I went into mediation, I'm going to have to hold this because my ear doesn't work. The reason I went to study mediation, and I practice also as a mediator and as a trainer of public engagement across impasses and differences in groups. It came from my work as an artist, looking for many years at questions of identity, both as personal as political, and how one's sense of self shifts in public and through social relations. So in a sense, I was questioning subjectivity from the beginning, from the late 60s on, feeling very uncomfortable in my own skin. It will get you there. So my work has never come directly from theory, even though I engage with it constantly. But I truly try to answer questions that I'm absolutely perplexed by as a human being. So I wanted to show you some works, and I limited it, and I may go through it I may bypass some things as we're going through it from the last decade, because if I go back to the 80s, you're going to get very bored, and it's going to get very late. But just to say that in the 80s, my work was very much about corporality and what it meant and how it felt to live in a body, in a physiological, phenomenological body. And I guess it was often read from a feminist perspective. It was also very much about how women experienced being looked at, and where a woman experienced her own gaze. So it was looking from kind of the inside out, recognizing that there was a politic that was affecting interiority, rather than just starting from the outside and maybe not even going inside. So I did that throughout the 80s. In the 90s, I began to work more with questions of your identity, not just my identity, and where the meeting ground is between you and me, or between you and me, between you and me. So the 90s was very much about kind of relational questioning of self and other, and the qualities, again, of power and the context of politics and cultural coding. And I would say that in the 2000s is when I studied conflict resolution, conflict studies. My work has become, well, you'll see, absolutely more social, and more. I'm very interested in, clearly, and it's kind of in fruition, I think, in this last decade, to me, there's more of an integration in how I'm interested in the psychological shadow of the political and the political shadow of the psychological. So a very psychosocial relationship of identity. And I'll just show you a few things, all right? And we take questions after? Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay. I guess I'll do it here, okay. So let me see if there's one before. Yeah, I wanted to start with this, and I may bypass another few. I'm showing you this. It's a close-up of part of an installed work. My work is often immersive and works with the totality of a space that the viewer will enter. And I don't want to spend too much time, but I want to show this work in particular. I started this in 2001 after 9/11. I started to look very closely at newspaper images that were delivered to my home, recognizing that I was totally confounded by what I was looking at, that I didn't have entry into it, that I was kind of numb and had no understanding of the crisis that was being represented to me, and that troubled me greatly. This image, what it is this is about 50 by 60 inches, and with the same size mirror underneath. The image atop is from the New York Times, I believe, in 2001, the beginning of the second Intifada between the Palestinians and Jews in the occupied territories in Israel. And it's a shot that I manipulated. In the original, the men are right side up, and the child is underneath trying to get away from their stampede. And it was a very political image. And anytime you see brown-skinned men running, it's pretty political. So I, again, because of my interest in the kind of the psychology of politics, not to leave it at a rhetoric or at a didactic, oh, I know what that means, I turned it around to imply more of a poetic mythos or mythology or subjectivity of the child. So you can read it yourselves. You're all in art history and art, so I don't have to decipher that for you. But it was very important for me in exhibition to have the mirror below, so that the mythological image above, or the psychological image above, is reflected very politically in the mirror, and one creates the other, that you can't separate one from the other, an image from its reflection. Okay? I'm going to go by that. I'll go to this.
If you punch on the backside
This?
Yeah, over on the.
You don't like the bar? I know, it looks like the, oh, it does that. Is that okay? Is it okay to just do that? Or shall I go back to the bar? The bar is better? Full screen. Oh, okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm a refugee to digital age. Most people are immigrants. I'm a refugee. Okay. I started working on this project, Sightlines, also in 2001, when I pulled out of the newspaper this image of Dr. Irma Rodriguez, forensic scientist in Juarez, Mexico, right across from El Paso. And it was very compelling to me, this particular image and the story of her. She was the chief forensic scientist on the case of hundreds and hundreds of mutilated bodies of young women found in the desert around Juarez over a period of now probably 20 years, unresolved. And it's connected to many issues of corruption and drugs and the American factories that are just across the border, and we won't go into that. It's very complicated and unsolved because the police are probably completely in cahoots with it. In this article, it spoke about her that summer losing her husband and her daughter were murdered. And she imagined and she understood that it was because she was the forensic scientist on the case, and she left Juarez and went to Chihuahua, took the rest of her family with her, but she continued her forensic science work. I was deeply compelled by her face and the fact that she could, out of clay, recreate the missing or the killed. And so this image is also describing a project that this ended becoming at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in 2006 in LA, where I built an octagonal room, 8-sided room, okay? You know what that means? Okay, good. I didn't until I wanted to make one, so just checking. And outside the room, I created all around the 8 walls, I created a timeline of my process in creating this work and the various places that I had to go to in my exploration, in my research, which then each became elements of the work itself. See here, this is the beginning where I first saw this image. I just put it up on my studio wall as I usually do and just passed it every day for months, not quite knowing why I was compelled, but knowing that I was. I then came across, a few months later, also in '01, I believe it was April, this image on the cover of Newsweek magazine. And it is the first female Palestinian suicide bomber and a Jewish Israeli woman, her age, her size, her coloration, her likeness, also killed. They were the only 2 killed. I was floored when I saw this image, coming from that part of the world, always being very moved and confounded by that crisis. And they also looked like they could be in my family, both of them. And I certainly cannot tell the Palestinian from the Jew. So this also went up on my wall, and after many months, I realized that I wanted to visit Irma Rodriguez in Chihuahua and ask her to sculpt their heads, which I did. So I made my way to Chihuahua with a grad student I had at that time from Mexico who could speak, obviously, Spanish. And she wanted to work on it. And we both saw the connection between the girls senselessly mutilated in the deserts around Juarez and the girls senselessly killed in this ongoing chronic crisis, that it's just, a human tragedy on both sides. So there were other elements to the timeline around the walls, but I'm going to jump to the inside of the room and the walls were covered with photographs that I took of the life-size heads, which I brought back to LA with me, and mirrors that were the same size as the photographs of the heads that were on swivels in the back, like rear windows in your car. So I could aim them to try and catch the various gazes between the girls. And I never could. The work is called sight lines because it's a term from cinema. I'm from LA. What can I say? It's a term from cinema, and it refers to your sight line, the viewer's sight line, as positioned by the camera. And my goal or my inquiry in this work was, could their eyes ever meet? I did go to Chihuahua. I lived with Irma for 3 days in her house, and we together finished sculpting the heads. I particularly was interested in their gaze. So we sought, ceramic eyes rather than her etching the eyes. And their eyes never met in the space from as many angles as I could situate them. And of course, as a viewer, your sight line was also reflected in the mirror, trying to meet them. So it was about this impossibility of meeting. I did a project from 08 or 05 till 08 that I called Stranded Subjects. And they were, again, this archive that I began in 2001 of pulling out images out of the newspapers, LA Times and New York Times. I continued till 2007. And I had accumulated an archive of images that really compelled me of crisis around the globe, for which I was very conscious of having to create my own subjective narrative, because I could only go so far in what was shown to me. And in 05, I started collaging, putting the images together. So I have a whole series of these. They're quite large, 60 by 40. And they're all of images from 2 or 3 different locations globally, 2 different dates from 2002 through 2007 that made up this new narrative. And to me, they're like history paintings. I grew up with Polish history paintings in my house. My parents were real old world Polish, and they left Poland with a few of the rare old oil paintings that were history paintings. That's how often artists communicated history. There were no newspapers. So that was in the back of my head. And in this image in particular, the women are from Istanbul, from a bombing, and the area that they're photoshopped into is in Florida, about a year apart. And in this one, the helicopters that are suspended in the air, Arafat's body is in this helicopter, and it's trying to land in Hebron, occupied territory, and it can't because the people have surged onto the strip. The legs that are dangling above it to frame the image are from a French Parisian anti-Le Pen demonstration a year earlier. So I'm colliding the way news collides in our minds, that there's no way we stay with a narrative or a topic or a crisis or a particular politic, that all this information, even though it may come to us in this linear fashion, one at a time, it's processed in a very nonlinear fashion. And who knows what we see, or what we believe, or how we come to believe it. So this is a project I did about a year later, in 2010, that it kind of is an extensive 3-month project where I brought into a huge warehouse space for 3 months lots of pieces out of my own personal archive, writing pieces, parts from many installations, objects that my parents had left me after their death from old Europe. And I continuously invited people into the archive to engage with me and ask me questions. And we just had this discourse going. And the objects that I had, whether they were deeply personal or whether I generated them, became like they were like personal objects that became portals into public histories or public politics. So I began to see personal objects in this. This is from a project I did called "The Artist in Her Archive." Can you see me in there? Asymmetry, 2001. This continued my work with this notion of private objects as political histories. And asymmetry, of course, refers to asymmetry and asymmetry. So in the installation, there's a timeline that goes across the wall and around the wall. This is about 60 feet. And there's 5 objects from the archive project that I did the year earlier. I just chose 5. And 2 other works that I used to comment on these. And the text underneath the linear timeline describes the image right above it in a very straightforward, didactic way. But then, of course, the way they connect up with each other is anything but that. So I think I have just one example. I'm sorry, these are so pixelated. I've never seen them so big. They're terrible. I don't know if you can even see anything. Anyhow, I'll just describe what I can. The image above is a photograph I took of my mother's, after she passed away, of her collection. Everybody has a private collection, even if it's just little trinkets or postcards. Her collection was high Enlightenment porcelain. And below that is my father's collection. He collected, you can't see a thing here, but believe me, this is an image of, I can tell you anything, this is an image of pre-biblical urns and glass oil holders. See, he was collecting pre-Enlightenment objects while she was collecting post-Enlightenment objects. And this was kind of the scenario in my home, because I really lived between old Europe, Palestine, Israel, Canada, and the States. And with 7 languages, and my mother had 6 passports, and so I'm kind of like, as we said earlier, a hybrid, but even worse, an octohybrid, octohybrid? Whatever, a mixed up person. But mixed up is a representative of how mixed up we are, right? Are you mixed up? Yes. Good. So the reason why I joined these 2 is all of these objects, when I was growing up, were all in the same glass shelved vitrine in the living room. I remember them in Israel as a little girl, I remember them in Montreal, and then I remember in my parents' home in San Diego. I was never allowed to touch them, but I always looked at them. When they were in the vitrine, they were mixed together. They're only separated. I only realized after they passed away, and I had to box these, that, oh my God, there's 2 radical cultural histories here. Well, I can't even read the text, so never mind. They're just connected, okay? The next project I did was called The Life of Life. And I had carried with me for 17 years 5 suitcases that were given to me by my father before he passed away. And I was the only one in the family that would take them. And they contained a lot of documents of his relationship to the Second World War. And I could never bring myself to open them, but I knew I had to keep them. 17 years later, which was a year ago, I realized, Dorit, if you're holding on to them, you better do something with them. So, put up or shut up. So as an artist, I said, well, I could turn them into art. That would give me some distance, handling, some, an aesthetic structure in which to look at them, because it was too charged for me. And then, of course, I went through a million, questions of structure, context, form, etc. I arrived at the idea of hiring a magician to work with me. And it came to me because I realized that as a child, I always thought my father was a magician. That he was able to move across all these incredibly crazy stories that he would tell me about his survival. I thought he must be a magician. So I got a magician, and I mean, he had, 20 address books from around the world. He had 40 passports from around the world. He had documents, from various countries from 1940. I mean, it was kind of amazing. Anyway, long story short, I'm still working on this, but I did a small performance called a prelude, which I divided into 2 sections. The first section, I'm relating to the audience, and I'm basically letting them go through the archive as I've chosen for me and the magician to work with. And I'm sharing stories, and a lot of them are presumed stories, because I sort of know what's in the picture, but I really don't. So again, it's like this knowledge, non-knowledge of this image that's supposed to be personal. The magician then took over, and he used the same props to create sleight of hand tricks. So the props that were in the part 1 were extremely charged and filled with intrigue and potential crisis and vulnerability and political, ethnic and racial hatreds. He then took those same objects and turned them into tricks. And I have to say that the audience preferred him to me, which I thought was, duh, no shit, Sherlock. But in a way, I'm talking about the artist. That the artist is both. That the artist really, whether you're working abstractly or figuratively, that we're really culling things, whether it's in our conscious or unconscious, whether it's from the inside or consciously from the outside. We're working with, transforming something into something. And hasn't been there, or hasn't been seen that way, or hasn't been positioned that way. Anyway, I'm continuing to work on this project. Okay. Oh, so history. I'm not going to show you the little video. It's a 30-minute video. No, it's a 30-second video. It's a 30-second spot. And it's shot in a studio across from mine with my friend Peter Wu. And he comes out holding this blanket, and this blanket was in my magic act earlier. And the question is uttered, can I be dropped from history? That's the image that's on your flyer. And he, within 30 seconds, shakes it, and shakes it, and shakes it, and it turns into this. So the question, can I be dropped from history, is story. It's loaded. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, and here we have a switch. I'm going to go straight into this. I have a much more public side too, not that my other work is not public, it's entirely public. But I have another thread of my work that I've always worked on since the late 70s that was much more in the public sphere and asking questions of that weren't necessarily coming from just myself. And this is the work I just began, and it's the notion of mediators, whom usually are seen in as resolvers of conflict in court cases, in litigated cases, which I did for 5 years and hated. That's not mediation. That's settlement conferencing. Mediation is very much about subjectivity, about what's remembered or not remembered, what the subtext is. It's very close to art, to the way I studied art in a very deconstructive way, into looking at what is behind a thought or an intention, to dig behind it, to look for deeper threads. And that's the way I practice mediation. And I realized that I'm really a construction worker. that my kind of unspoken goal is to help develop civic society. So I actually wore one of these during Occupy and walked around just mediating things as they came up amongst the occupants. So how would you like to wear one of those? You can. And walk around. I could teach you how. Mediate between I, thou. Okay, this is jumping around, so I'll just go with the flow. This is, I'm just going to read it to you. It's a series of prints that I've just made called The Sighted See the Surface. And I'm also working with the Institute for the Blind in LA, and I'm reading them the daily newspaper to blind people and realizing how much language is about visuality in many ways. So I pulled texts out of my own journals over the many, many years and found several that relate to, in literal and metaphoric ways, to the notion of seeing. I hold a mirror to reality, outer and inner, how they will commingle, the owner of the mirror may not suspect. I'm going to go through this really quickly. I also did a series of prints of Braille journals of national magazines, where you see that title, you can totally see the cover because it's all in the type, but it's Braille. You know, the sighted know what that says, knows what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to jump now. I have no idea how this preview thing is going, but I'm going to mix it up because my life is mixed up anyway, so it doesn't matter. When I finished grad school in the mid-'70s, believe it or not, I worked for a gallery for a short time, and then I was catapulted into directing a nonprofit. And I did that for a year in 1979, and decided to give the space up in 1979 and work from a telephone. A telephone and a phone book, and calling up all kinds of community spaces, businesses, art spaces, movie houses, libraries, you name it, to collaborate with them to situate art in their places. This is 1979. I'm so glad people are finally talking about this. And the art here is the cover. This says FAR, FAR, the name of the organization with Foundation for Art Resources, FAR. I commissioned an artist to do a project to reflect FAR, and she made this telephone cover, back when there were telephones that looked like that. This is the beginning of another large project I started in 1992 called Culture Club Collaborative. It's professional artists working with homeless teenagers in Minneapolis. It's now 22 years old. And I convinced colleagues and friends of mine from all across Minneapolis, St. Paul, to give me tickets to their events. And I took the kids to see them. So that was one image. Here's another, a group of kids at the Walker Art Center. And I know you can't read any of that, but those in 2008, they celebrated their 15th anniversary, and I don't know why that's doing that. Hello? Up there? It's flickering, but it's okay now. That's just all the names of the artists that I worked with for over 15 years. And that's the names of all the youth we worked with for 15 years. And that's all the art partners. Guthrie Theater, Illusion Theater, Walker Art Center, Southern Theater, Mixed Blood, Franken Sculpture Park, Asian American, theater companies, Speedboat Gallery, you name it, on and on. These are the collaborations that were created. And these are the social service staff that I worked with to help me work with the homeless kids who were often at risk and with a lot of troubled situations in their lives. And here are the staff and board of directors. So this is still going on. I worked with them from 1992 to 1998. I founded it and created it. The reason why I didn't know that this is what I was going to find, but after the NEA became defunct for individual artists in '89, and I was very involved in public rallies. Hi there, up there, it's not working again. I'll leave that to people who know more than I do. I lost a lot of funding myself as an artist, and a lot of the organizations that were commissioning me no longer were getting money to work with experimental projects that were performative or immersive. And I was very confused. And I one day was riding the bus. I had been living in Minneapolis at that time, teaching at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I got off the bus at, we were passing a storefront that said Project Off Streets on it, written on it. And I got off to just go in and find out what Project Off Streets was, and it turned out to be a crisis center for homeless kids, which I'd never walked into one as an artist or as a human being, didn't know they existed, didn't have any connection to them. But I think because I was struggling with my own identity as an artist, it became very good, really important and right material, fertile material for me to investigate what I was going to do as an artist, or what it meant to be an artist at that time. And I hung out with those kids for about 2 months and then realized that they were getting all kinds of services for survival, but absolutely nothing for inspiration. So my byline was Culture Club Collaborative, bridging survival and inspiration. And the artists were brought in just to work with them, and I took them out, as I mentioned, to see a ton of art. Oh, and here they are with Dr. Spock. See Dr. Spock?
Oh my gosh.
He gave us some money. Funny that he should be there when I'm holding this. And this is in '08. We just did a huge exhibition of projects that have been carried through the Twin Cities since '92. And this is the fellow that had the trust in me to let me even do it. He was the director of Project Off Streets, Edward McBrayer. Here I am at Neve Shalom wa Chata Salam, which means in Hebrew and in Arabic, Oasis of Peace. And I took a group of volunteer mediators to that village. It was created in 1976 by a monk who lived in Latrun, which is an old monastery right between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem that I remembered as a child going to, because I lived in Tel Aviv and my father would go there to buy wine and bread. And that, a monk from that monastery decided to give 40 acres to Abdusalam Najjar, this man, a Palestinian man, to found a village to be initiated from the beginning by Palestinian and Jewish families. They started with 10 families, 5 each, and now they have over 55 families of each. And believe it or not, the Israeli government still doesn't fund them, doesn't do anything. They are very well known in the Middle East for creating curriculum that's bilingual and bicultural, the first curriculum that's both Palestinian and Jewish, from K through 6, and in designing engagement and mediation curriculum between Palestinians and Jews. So I took a group there to work with Abdusalam and some of his colleagues on looking at a cross-cultural curriculum, how to develop cross-cultural curriculum from the point of view of the Palestinians, not just the Jews. And here's some people in the workshop. This is my friend that I met during that year. Oh my God, my mind's blanking on her name. I'm so sorry. She's a Palestinian woman who was born the same time I was in Israel, in a village very close to Jerusalem, very close to Tel Aviv, where I grew up, but no longer existed because it was taken over by Jewish immigration. And we were doing a presentation together at Brown University. And this is Occupy LA. And I am, where's Waldo? Here. I went as a mediator and just hung out and, like I said, mediated amongst them because there was a lot of need. And, I learned so much in working with them. It's like it's one thing to have a political vision and a commitment that's joint. It's another thing to know how to live together. So you have to deal with interiority and the social and the public political at the same time, or it's just not going to work. And that's what Occupy found out. And this is a project I did in LA. I'm not going to talk about it. I just came from Istanbul at the Mediators Beyond Borders International Conference, where I met these extraordinary women activists from, this man is from Kenya, this woman is from Syria, this woman is from Libya, these two women are from Iraq. Working as independent activists in their local communities to help each other in time of crisis. Oh, back to bias and bias. Oh, why is it there? Okay, it's going in a circle. I think it's done. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I want to have a little bit of time for you to reflect, respond, react, whatever you need to do. Throw tomatoes, ask questions. Thank you, by the way. Thank you very much. Anybody have comment or question? Whoa. About any of it, because I know I threw out a lot. Yeah.
Have you actually ever worn the vest that says mediator on it?
It's in production. But I did wear a T-shirt that we developed, the color of the UN, light blue, with the word mediator across it for Occupy. Yeah. I brought the vest, or a model of one of the vests, to the conference in Istanbul, and I modeled it for the participants. There were 200 people from across the world. The people that responded to it immediately were the women from the Middle East. Because they said, oh, we wear those in conflict, real conflict. I had no idea. So there was a connection there that was like, oh.
Bulletproof vest, is that what
No. Just the safety vest. These are construction safety vests to make you visible.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you want to start a new endeavor,
Yeah.
do you think much about, does this connect with what I was just doing before? Is there a common thread, or is it more like, this is something I'm interested in now, I'm going to pursue this?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was younger, I didn't even know that my work was connected. It just was done on impulse and passion. I think I had to gain in years into my midlife, 40s and 50s, to look back and go, oh my God, it's all about the same thing. And so now I don't ask that anymore because I'm not going anywhere. It's the same. Yes?
You had mentioned in the beginning that your work never comes directly from theory, but it works with it. Could you speak more about that?
Okay. When I was at school, well, okay, first of all, I studied sociology and psychology before I went to art school. I was very young. I was 16 to 18 in Montreal. I learned a lot of pedagogy and a lot of then sociology theory that to me, I had no words for it. I didn't have the language, but I didn't trust it, and I dropped out. It felt to me, this is what it felt like, and now I have words for it. The words are, oh my God, this is just objectification of people they have no connection to. And I'm being taught to study others, to find better ways for them to live. And my knee-jerk reaction as a 16 to 18-year-old was, hello, I don't even know who the hell I am. So that took me to art school because I had this idealistic notion that the artist could do that, could question that, and I still do to this day. but really ask questions of the interstices, the things between questions. At CalArts, I was totally immersed in semiology, linguistic theory, feminist theory, Lacan, deconstruction theory, Derrida, etc. And those are so embedded in me that I don't even think about them consciously anymore. Two of my strongest theoretical mentors were Foucault and Hélène Cixous. I don't know if they mean anything to you, but okay. So, they drive me, but they still do. I mean, both in the poetics and in the political questioning, and in the subjectivity, interiority. And often when I'm teaching, even now, I use, and often Barthes as well. I use an essay often, so simple, by Barthes called Upon Leaving the Movie Theater. I don't know if you guys know that. It's not well distributed. I'm not sure where it exists, in what book, publication. But I love it because his writing, his text spoke with a lot of integrity to me. Like, he's really asking that question. It's coming from a real personal place, not just from a philosophic, theoretical place, even though they connect. And he asked in that question, he said, when I go into a movie theater, I love to be seduced by the image. Oh, the lure of the image. I love falling into the picture and losing myself. And then he goes, but if I do that, I'm so aware that I've given up my power, that I'm sitting in a civic space with 100 other people, and I'm in a body in a weighted space, and I'm sitting on a chair, and I'm not in social reality anymore. So he talked about this dividedness which we all have between consciousness and unconsciousness, which coexists. It's not binary at all. And he says, what do I do as a thinking civic individual? How do I not give up my power, not pretend that image is not made up of light coming from a machine that's been constructed by somebody? But I love it. I want to swim into it. He said, I know, and he's using a Brecht sense. He said, if only I could be twice fascinated. Have two bodies, the body that is present and the body that is witness. That is the body that is present in the activity and the body that is witness to that presence. I love that. And that's kind of underneath a lot of how I think about my work. And with Cixous, one book that I read often and use a lot is the book of Promethea, where she's asking the question as she's writing, who is moving my pen? From where am I thinking this thought? From where inside me is this coming? And she writes a whole book like that, meeting all the characters and all the personalities and whatnot, and unafraid and unapologetic, and hello, this is identity. So I'm very aware of those kind of theoretical threads, and many others which I've sort of dropped, but I think are there because my work, it feels my process is it's both very poetical and open process, and also at some point becomes extremely formal and deconstructive. Hope that helps. Yeah.
What is mediator training like? Where did you go to be trained?
Well, I chose to do something that I would never do again. I went to Pepperdine, which is a law school, Pepperdine University. And they have in the law school the Strauss Institute for Conflict Resolution. And so it's 95% lawyer students, law students, JDs, and 10-15% others like me coming in from other disciplines. It was very legal oriented and very strategic and procedural. I learned a lot of communication skills, both in language and how to address the other. But it was very difficult. You don't have to go to a law school to get a mediation degree. I did it because I said to myself, my God, you know, I've lived my entire life teaching art and living amongst in the art world. And if I'm going to be a mediator, I have to understand more about the public psyche. You know, it's just, this is ridiculous. I can't. So I said, go ahead, do it. So I jumped into dominant culture, law school. And I used to get the lowest grades in my class, not because I'm stupid, I hope I'm not, I don't think I am, but because I would write my papers and my essays as performances and as film treatments. And I adapt them because I said, they already have the workbook, why should I write a didactic essay? But the professors had a really hard time with that. Until they figured out who I was and gave me an award for thinking differently. And it was 3D glasses. I said, 3D is not enough, honey. You do the 3D. Give me 5. You know? So, but today there are many, that was only like 10 years ago that I started school in that. Today it's a proliferated. The study of mediation is now just a tiny sliver within a larger umbrella called conflict studies, peace and conflict studies. And there are international PhD programs on that now everywhere. I've met some amazing scholars in Istanbul at the last conference I went to who are doing PhD in conflict studies. So mediation is a sliver of that. It's one strategy. It's one way of working. There are many. Yeah?
Any other questions? I was remiss in thanking our sponsors, which are the Faculty Development Council for the award for Youth Visions in Museum Studies, who in part sponsored Dorit's time with us, and also the Agnes Cole Blackburn Visiting Artists and Scholars Fund, and the Elise Zeller's Sauer Fund for the Fine Arts. So if there's no further questions, let's really Dorit for her very thought-provoking presentation. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.